Hi everybody, this is Ibarionex from the Candid Frame. I've been on vacation for the last 3 weeks and I'm back with a new video. And I had a real interesting time. I was in Europe during that time doing a lot of street photography, and I'll be sharing that in the coming weeks. But one of the things that I was really working on was creating images with more depth while I was out there. And one of the things that makes that possible is paying attention to what's happening with your foreground. I've talked before about layering, but today I wanted to talk specifically about foreground elements in your compositions. But before we start, I am going to be in Miami in December for the Miami Street Photography Festival. And I'll be conducting some live interviews there as well as a workshop. But I wanted to let you know about a contest that they're offering that has a deadline of October 1st. So you have a month to submit images for this competition. There's some great work that's submitted into our community of street photography here, and I think some of those images should definitely be submitted to the contest. I can tell you from having judged a lot of contests that the great majority of pictures that get submitted to contests are fairly lackluster, and the images that usually win really stand out from all the other photographs that are submitted. And it seems that the people who have the lackluster images don't have any hesitation about submitting images. And the people who have really good photographs, for whatever reason, just don't send it in. And I want to encourage you that if you have photographs that you're really passionate about, that have gotten favorable reviews, either here on Flickr or on Instagram or whatever, take the time to just submit at least one photograph. You never know what can happen, and there are some great images that are submitted to this contest every year, but yours could be one of the winners, and you can check it out by going to the Miami Street Photography Festival website or clicking on the link on the notes, which you'll see below. And if you're in the Miami area during that time, I'd love to see you. All right, here we have a photo by Jagatic Photos. This has no XF information on it. Now, here Joseph uses this foreground element, the film director or a PA or someone who's speaking to the actor Garrett Morris while they're doing rehearsals for, I guess, a film or a television show. And even though it's not a street photograph, it speaks to this idea of paying attention to what's in your foreground. A lot of the time, we're paying attention to our subject and what's behind the background. And we've talked about that a lot in the videos that we've done here. But I think it's important to be just as conscious of what's happening with your foreground, and when possible, using that as an effective tool for controlling the viewer's experience of the picture. Now, in this case, by using the person in the foreground and by framing Garrett's face in the crook of this person's arm, we create this virtual window through which we see the actor's face. And it also creates a contrast between soft and sharp, both of which guide us straight to the eyes of Garrett and his expression as he's looking up at this person's face. It really controls our experience of how and where we look at first in the shot. There's some things on the table like the bottle of water, the script, some food, there's a picture frame in the upper left-hand corner, but all of those things really are secondary to what's happening in the face, but because by framing him in the crook of the arm, the photographer succeeds in emphasizing that this is where I want you to look first. And the contrast between the soft and the sharp, and by using that foreground element to create that difference between soft and sharp, is the way a foreground element can be used really effectively to control where you're looking. As you'll see with some of the several other images that I've picked for this, a foreground element can be anything. It can be a window, it can be a bird, it can be a bike. It really doesn't matter what it is. But what's really necessary is that you are conscious as to how it balances with all the other elements in the frame. What you don't want is a foreground element that's going to be distracting. What you don't want is a foreground element that is competing with the subject for the viewer's attention. You want it to help to emphasize the subject rather than take away from it. Okay, here we have a shot by Ronny Olsson. No XF data here. So here we have a really interesting shot. We have this boy that's on this rock. We have this fellow here in the middle ground. Well, I'm not sure what he's doing. Looks like he's on the phone or maybe combing his hair. And then we have the expanse of water in the background. And so here, the composition is really interesting because I could have imagined a shot where it was just a picture of this fellow sitting at the edge of the water. And I think a lot of shots are often very simple with respect to that. We have a subject, we frame them in relationship to what's happening in the background, and we really don't make much consideration in terms of, maybe I can include something in the foreground to make the image that much more interesting. Because let's imagine this shot without the boy and without the rock there. And if we saw the scene and we felt like, oh, this would make an interesting shot, the big challenge here is that you have this expanse of dirt and grass in the foreground. And though there is a slight contrast in terms of the tone of the grass and the sort of the dirt or the sand here, that in and of itself doesn't really provide an interesting element for something that's going to take up half of the frame, right? I mean, you got some interesting tones here between this, the grass, and the water, but so much of it's weighted for that even with this contrasting element of the human figure there, it still would be so heavily weighted for this expansion of tone that I don't know that the figure here of this fellow here would really make for an interesting photograph. By backing up and including the rock and the boy there, I think it really makes for a much more effective photograph. It breaks up all this sort of negative space that exists there, not only by the presence of the rock, but also the presence of the shadow here and the silhouette of the boy within the frame. Because you can see we have this expansiveness of basically white or very light gray that dominates almost half or a third of the frame here. And having the presence here of the boy helps to sort of break it up. And it helps create a balance between the right-hand side of the frame and the left-hand side of the frame. Because even though the figure of the boy and the rock in the foreground is taking up more space in terms of the context of the frame, it balances out the composition for me because of the presence of all these sort of dark tones here by the grass and this figure here. I don't know if the image would work as effectively as a balanced composition without the presence of the boy here. And one of the things I'm always thinking about when I see something that may initially draw my attention, say this guy here at the edge of the frame, I make that shot, but then I think of what happens if I back up? What happens if I include some other element into the frame in order to make the shot? When I show you some of the pictures from my recent trip to Paris, you'll see how conscious I was about other elements in the frame besides my main subject. And for me, that was absolutely really critical to make the more successful photographs that I make. And part of you being aware of the potential of foreground elements is really slowing down. It's a principle that I talk about over and over again in these videos, but it really is important to slow down and to really reconsider what you're seeing in a scene, because that initial thing that you're reacting to may make for an interesting photograph, but it's taking the step back and reconsidering the scene, reevaluating it, and thinking, could I introduce 1, 2, or 3 other elements in this shot and not allow it to fall apart, but actually sort of strengthen the shot? And slowing down and being really patient and really observing carefully what you're seeing in front of the camera can really make the difference between a really good shot and an exceptional one. Here we have a shot by Mahesh Balasubramanian. And this was made with a Ricoh GR at 1/500th of a second, f9, ISO 1600. Now this shot is really interesting because I think it's a pretty complex shot, and it's all about gesture. I've talked about gesture in other videos, but this is all about gesture because all the major characters in this shot exhibit really interesting gesture, from the bird to the person who's sort of bending down, who's headless in the frame, and the couple on the right-hand side of the frame. It's a wonderful a shot in which gesture becomes a really important part of the success of the overall photograph. This is a shot that achieves success also because of its layers. The foreground layer obviously is the bird that is, eating something. Then we have the person that's immediately behind them, who's sort of bending down in the water. Then we have the couple in the right-hand side, and then we have the waves in the foreground. So you got like 4 different planes, at least, of different elements that are brought together within the frame. Again, the presence of the bird serves as a great anchor to this shot. Because if the shot didn't have the bird, I think the shot still would be kind of interesting just because of the interesting gesture that's created by the people that are in the frame. But there's something about the bird and its gesture and its contrast with the human figures that makes for a really interesting shot. I mean, I looked at that frame and immediately just stopped me. And I really like the fact that there's so much depth to it. And you can see here that even though the human figures are smaller in the frame and the bird is much larger in the frame, it's not just about the bird, right? I mean, you look at the bird, but then you start looking at the other elements in the frame. And one of the reasons why our eyes kind of flow through the frame pretty nicely is all the other tones in the frame are fairly neutral. They're sort of white to grayish. And the clothing that's being worn by the people and the color of the bird's body itself is very dark. And it creates this contrast between light and dark. And it's something that's possessed by all the different characters that are in this frame. So it links all of those three things together. Even though they have no relationship to each other, visually they do within the context of the frame because of the tones. And this is something that I think is really indicative of the fact that it's a black and white photograph. I don't know how effective this shot would be as a color. Color would be another element in the shot that might, make or break it. I'm not sure. But as a black and white, I think this is really, really effective. But again, it's the decision to include the bird, and the choice that Mahesh here had to make was that he had to lower himself, his body. He couldn't shoot this just at eye level. He had to get down pretty close to the ground in order to effectively get the shot. I don't know if he had the benefit of a tilty screen or whether he physically got all the way down on the ground to make the shot. But that choice is something that you often have to think about when you're trying to compose a shot with a foreground element, because the foreground element for a lot of shots sometimes is happening below waist level. It's things that are below our waist level that we have to consider. So it's not just enough to simply tilt the camera down. Sometimes you physically have to move your body down a couple of feet in order to include that element in the frame and make it an effective part of the shot. So, it's a good exercise to practice to consider including foreground elements in your shot, because it gets you out of that sort of trap of always shooting from eye level. One of the best shots that I shot from Paris, that if you look at in my Instagram feed, is a shot of a waiter shot through some glasses that are on our table. And I never could have achieved that shot if I had been standing up and shooting it at eye level. It was the choice to shoot it at an unusual perspective that makes the shot effective. And that's what makes this shot really, really strong. Hope that was helpful to you. And if you want to study with me in person, I am going to be having a street photography workshop. It's actually going to be a 2-day workshop here in Los Angeles beginning on September 16th through the Los Angeles Center of Photography. We still have some spaces available, and it's going to be happening on Saturday and Sunday. We'll be hitting the streets of Hollywood and downtown Los Angeles and doing some extensive critique sessions, much like the ones that you see in these videos every week. Check it out by going to the lacphoto.org website, or you'll also find a link below in the notes for this episode. I would love to see some of you out there, and hopefully some of you can join us. And if you don't know about the Candid Frame beyond these videos, the Candid Frame is a podcast which features conversations with some of the world's best photographers. And we offer these episodes every week. You'll usually find them on this YouTube feed, but we also make them available through streaming on the website, or you can download the Candid Frame app, which is free, which gives you access to all the episodes, all 384 episodes that I've been producing for the last almost 11 years now. So check it out by going to thecandidframe.com. So thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you next time.